Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a highly realistic thought experiment, pulling directly from current economic data, historical precedents, and expert geopolitical forecasts. We're going to paint a realistic picture of something almost unthinkable. We are mapping out, step by step, the data-driven reality of what happens if the world's most powerful nation, the United States, literally collapses overnight.
Picture this for a second. You wake up tomorrow, and the impossible has actually happened. The screens are flashing red, your bank accounts are completely frozen, the internet is barely crawling, and the basic trust that holds our modern society together, it shatters in a matter of hours. Without America acting as the global anchor, the entire balance of power is instantly broken. So, how exactly do we get there? And more importantly, what happens next?
Let's start with Part 1, the epicenter, the unthinkable economic crash.
$30 trillion. Just kind of let the sheer weight of that number sink in. That is the GDP of the United States. It's a massive, absolute powerhouse of an economic engine, but it's also highly fragile. Experts have been warning about a perfect storm brewing, a mix of slow growth, high unemployment, and really sticky inflation. It creates this state of stagflation. When the cost of everyday living skyrockets and the value of your currency plummets, that $30 trillion foundation starts looking incredibly vulnerable.
And look, this vulnerability isn't exactly a secret. Political figures from all sides have been waving huge red flags. Just recently, Donald Trump issued a pretty stark warning, saying the U.S. currency is crashing and could actually lose its status as the world standard. He described this potential loss as the greatest defeat for the country in 200 years, which would effectively strip the U.S. of the dominant top-tier international status it's held since the fall of Soviet Russia.
But it's not just about the money. Some geopolitical analysts argue the American system itself is basically running on rented power. The theory here is that American dominance is heavily built on borrowed intellectual power, meaning the U.S. relies massively on drawing top global talent to fuel its innovation. If a collapsing society sparks a reverse brain drain where all those brilliant minds pack up and leave, the system's core capabilities could evaporate almost instantly.
Which brings us to Part 2, 0 hour, a week of domestic chaos.
On day one of the collapse, we see this staggering contrast in debt. Think about the average American, making around $66,000 a year, carrying roughly $105,000 in debt, and sitting on a mere $5,000 in savings. They are stretched totally thin. Now, put that right next to the federal government, which is operating with an unbelievable $36 trillion national debt. When the crisis hits, absolutely no one, not the citizen, not the state, has a safety net to fall back on.
And things spiral out of control incredibly fast. We're talking a matter of days. Days 1 and 2 bring unprecedented market panic. Household wealth just plummets. By days 3 and 4, supply chains completely halt. Grocery stores are emptied of the essentials, and the markets take drastic action. Then, by days 5 through 7, we hit a brick wall. Political gridlock, actual debt defaults, and outright unrest pouring into the streets.
Let's zoom right into day 4, because this is when the true panic sets in. The stock market crosses that catastrophic -20% drop threshold. And what does that do? It triggers an immediate, forced halt in all trading. So this isn't just a bad day on Wall Street. It means people literally cannot sell their stocks to save their wealth. This sparks massive bank runs. Banks run out of physical cash and start imposing incredibly strict withdrawal limits just to keep the lights on.
So, in a desperate bid to stop the bleeding, a sitting administration, say a hypothetical Trump administration in our simulation, might attempt some seriously aggressive interventions. They could push for a 2008-style $700 billion bank bailout or slap on aggressive global tariffs to try and strong-arm foreign nations. They might even use executive orders to just print more money. But here's the catch. Printing cash to cover immediate debts in a collapsing economy turns regular inflation into uncontrollable hyperinflation so fast, suddenly you've got way more dollars chasing fewer and fewer goods. And then we hit day 6, the breaking point. The government desperately needs to borrow more just to survive, but heavily divided partisan politics cause the debt ceiling vote to completely fail. The United States officially defaults on its debt. Instantly, foreign investors dump their American shares, the dollar completely nosedives, and all across the country citizens begin rioting over the bare basics, like bread and water.
Moving right into Part 3, the contagion, global financial meltdown.
According to economic analysts, this global contagion spreads like wildfire, but it doesn't hit everyone equally. These 5 nations, they'd be the first dominoes to fall. Japan takes a massive hit because they hold immense US dollar reserves.
Saudi Arabia is thrown into utter chaos because global oil is priced in dollars. Turkey is drowning in dollar-denominated debt, so their imports are crushed and inflation spikes. Argentina, which is already super dependent on the dollar, sees its entire trade collapse. And Lebanon, whose economy essentially runs on US dollars, experiences a complete and total system freeze.
But wait, the contagion isn't just financial, it is heavily digital. Think about it. The modern internet relies largely on American infrastructure. Actually, over 90% of the world's internet traffic routes through US-controlled infrastructure or companies. If the US economy halts entirely, major tech conglomerates could just freeze. Imagine Google going completely offline, Apple ecosystems totally locking up, and Microsoft enterprise networks going dark. This ripple effect literally disconnects the world. You're looking at digital chaos right alongside the financial ruin.
Now let's look at the geopolitical map in Part 4. Power vacuum, redrawing the global map. With the U.S. military deterrent gone overnight, geopolitical models predict opportunistic land grabs on a terrifying scale. It's basically a simultaneous global invasion. Mexico might push northward to reclaim historic territories, Canada could move southward to secure some strategic advantages, Russia instantly makes moves to reclaim Alaska and turn Hawaii into a Pacific military outpost. Over in the Middle East, Iran launches devastating operations against an isolated Israel, and China launches a full-scale invasion of Taiwan while simultaneously pressuring South Korea.
Of course, this immediate aggression triggers frantic secondary reactions. Shocked by China and Russia making moves, Japan would have absolutely no choice but to rapidly remilitarize just to defend its national security. Meanwhile, over in Europe, NATO, an alliance that relies heavily on American leadership, funding, and military backbone, instantly crumbles. That leaves the entire European continent completely exposed.
And without NATO or U.S. intervention acting as a shield, Russia would fully exploit the chaos. Forecasts suggest they wouldn't just stop at their current lines. They'd fully annex Ukraine and immediately ramp up aggressive military pressure across Eastern Europe. It really proves that without the U.S. standing in the way, old empires will rapidly seek to expand their borders.
Simultaneously, China steps right into the naval void. Without the U.S. Navy out there patrolling international waters, China becomes highly aggressive. They assert absolute and unchecked dominance in the South China Sea, which directly threatens the sovereignty of neighboring nations like the Philippines and Indonesia.
Finally, we arrive at Part 5, the aftermath, a new world order.
When the dust settles, the ultimate fallout leaves the United States as just a shell of its former self. Foreign superpowers and even former allies would seize whatever U.S. assets remain globally. International markets would permanently reject the dollar as a medium of exchange. And back at home, those everyday citizens, the average Americans we talked about earlier, would be forced into a mass exodus. We're talking millions fleeing as refugees toward the borders of Canada and Europe just to survive.
But you know the saying, power abhors a vacuum. Amidst the destruction of old alliances and the fall of the American empire, emerging powers would step right into the void to dictate the new century. Many analysts actually point to nations like India. With its massive, young population and rapidly growing infrastructure, they are standing at the edge of destiny, totally ready to rise from the chaos and reshape the entire global order.
So, what is the big takeaway here? Why does this matter to you? Because it perfectly highlights the concept of the ripple effect. This entire thought experiment illustrates the dangerous fragility and just the deep interconnectedness of our modern geopolitical and economic systems. One catastrophic failure at the center doesn't just end a single country. It completely rewrites the entire world.
While this is a hypothetical simulation, the economic indicators and global tensions that inspired it are very, very real. It definitely makes you look differently at the stability of the world we wake up to every single day. So, I want to leave you with this. How do you think a U.S. economic crash would truly play out in reality? Would it be this devastating or something entirely different? Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.